Welcome to Titans of Transition, featuring real-life stories, anecdotes, and inspiration about pivotal career moments from leaders who have been there.
And the other mentor is Mark Cole. Mark was so patient in letting me just talk, and what he said to me was, borrow the belief I have in you at this moment until yours matches. And that went straight to my heart. And it's just, no one's ever said something like that to me.
Kimberly Hambrick, welcome to Titans of Transition.
Hey, Joe, I am so excited to be here.
You know, they say turnabout is fair play, and I was just on the Cannoli Coach podcast.
The Cannoli Coach, yes.
It was awesome. That was my first guest appearance, so I was honored.
You know, I saw when you posted that, and why did I not know that when I was talking to you? I love newbies.
I don't know.
I love newbies. You did a great job for being your first guest appearance. It was great, and I'm honored that you chose the Cannoli Coach to step out on the ledge with.
It was so much fun. It was great, and I will leave a link in my show notes so people can jump over there to get familiar with your podcast as well. But Kimberly, I'm just so happy to have you on. As we talked previously, it became really clear that as coaches, we have a similar interest in guiding our coachees, our clients through transitions in their career and their life. So I feel like there's a real good connection here, and I'm really excited about having you on. You have a very interesting background. You've done corporate. I've done corporate. You know, we're in a different space now. But what I'd like to do is just have you take a few minutes at the 30,000 foot level and tell folks what you're currently doing, what you're specializing in as a leadership trainer and coach, what you're doing to add value into that space. And then we can slide into your transition stories and lessons learned from your path.
Sure, thank you. So about 3 years ago, I decided to step away and open up my own consulting business. So I'm a leadership development and growth coach and trainer. And what I like to say is I design empowered leaders who then go on and empowered others. So, you know, we're both members of the John Maxwell team, and John always says success is when you add value to yourself, and significance is when you add values to others. And I've been blessed throughout my corporate career, or more after I left corporate, with amazing mentors and coaches. And it was a calling on my heart to be more intentional and help grow others. So that's what I do. I work with everyone from that emerging leader who's just stepping into their first leadership role, and they're used to being peers with their team, and now they're in charge of them, all the way up to a very seasoned CEO who has had a stellar career, but knows there's something more that they want to do. And so that's kind of where I play.
Oh, it's awesome. It's best when people are really interested in growing, and it, regardless of where they are on their journey, if they're ready to dig in, and having a coach come alongside like yourself is just so valuable. I know I reconnected with my coach, my first coach recently, going back to 20 years ago, and it was at a critical juncture in my career, and he was so useful to me. In fact, that's what made me look into doing coaching myself. So for those who haven't engaged a coach, couldn't recommend it any more highly. So
no, I agree. And I love that you mentioned the part when they're ready.
Yeah.
Because they have to be ready. We co-create with them. We're not the person that tells them what to do. And it's really, what is it that you want to do? And we hold you accountable, and we gently push and nudge you along the way, but it really has to come from within. If you're not ready to make the investment, and I'm not talking about monetary, I'm talking about the investment of being intentional and consistent to make the changes that you want. If you're not ready to do that, then you're not ready for a coach.
Yeah, very true. Very true. You know, the intention I have with Titans of Transition is really to engage those who are seeking to get answers. Maybe they don't have very much clarity in terms of what their ideal path is. You know, you and I have talked previously about our beliefs that people are gifted with certain things from above. And really, until you open that gift and then re-gift it into the world, there's going to be some disconnection, some sense of something's not right, some friction. I love the way you stated it. It's a co-creation process. So
yeah,
let's
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's pivot and hear a little bit about your path and your transitions, because I know you have some great stories to tell.
So I was in corporate for close to 30 years before I decided to step out on my own. And my corporate world was, I worked as an educational consultant. And so what that meant, Joe, I was not a teacher. I have two amazing grown children. I love them dearly. They knew where the line was. Not every other person's child knows where the line is. And so I knew early on I would not be a great teacher. And the reason that I knew that was, of all places, when I was substituting for Sunday school one day as the teacher. And the lesson was on respect. And one of the little girls, and I still remember her name, which I will not mention, had told me that she did not have to listen to me, that I wasn't the real teacher, and she wasn't going to do what I said. And I said, children, this is a good example of someone who's not respectful. And she went and told her mother, and there was a long conversation after Mass. But I knew where my strengths were. And so I worked for educational consulting companies where I did research and evaluation. So I was one of those, you talked about your science background. I have a little bit of a nerd in me in terms of data. And I would sit in an office and I would crunch numbers, and I loved that. But really early on, I developed, or I knew I had a strength for corporate development and business development. So I was that person who would bring strategic partnerships to the table. I thrive in the environment of competition. Man, I love going after multi-year, multi-million-dollar projects and winning. I didn't always win, but that just made me want to win more. And that's really what I did. I moved into overseeing large multi-state capacity building programs where we would train Department of Education staff to roll out their initiatives. And I loved it. And throughout all of my career, probably since the early 90s, I was in some sort of leadership role. And I would develop and mentor others. And there was just something so satisfying in seeing what somebody could be, seeing their potential, and helping them reach what they wanted to do with it. But then I realized along the way, I kind of forgot about me. I was that overachiever. I was always getting another degree. I was always looking for another position, but I forgot that I had a right to be following my path as well. So as I was struggling with that, I think a really important transition point came in that as I was going through that, we had a very personal situation with our youngest child. And it was a situation that was created by his own free will. So I never make excuses. It was a situation that he created. But as a mother, I didn't know what I could do to help him. I mean, I was struggling. I'm really a take charge person. And I couldn't find a thread to hold on to. And as we were moving through that, and just as we were coming out on the other side, I got blindsided by a friend and a colleague at work who had shared the story of my son up to the CEO of the billion-dollar corporation that we worked at. Now, Joe, not embarrassed. This was my son. People who needed to know knew. I just kind of said that wasn't his story to tell. And I thought we were okay. But I found out a few weeks later that we weren't okay. And my telling him not to share that kind of uncovered that this person had secretly recorded me both audio and video recording and journaling for about 10 plus years, the whole time that this person and I worked together in two different companies. And so I'm brought into a conversation and this was mentioned. And I realized nobody thought this was a problem but me. And I heard myself say I resign. And in all honesty, that was the first time I ever truly stood up for myself. And I realized I deserved more because I battled with limiting self-beliefs. And so my transition out of corporate was kind of bumpy, kind of shocking, kind of disturbing, but the right decision. And so I wake up the next morning because I resigned. I gave up a great position, a great salary, benefits. And I wake up the next day and I have zero, nada, nothing, no plan.
Wow. A job isn't just a position and a salary. I mean, there was an inherent trust that was broken.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, big time.
That was a bridge too far.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as I've processed through this, because it was the right decision for me, and I'm the type of person that I was going to make it work. And I did it. And so I always tell people, don't do what I did. Have a plan. But if you are faced with something like that, do what's best for you. And what was best for me was believing in myself for the very first time and standing up for myself. And what I will say, because you mentioned the word trust, for a few months after I'm out on my own and I'm growing business, and you and I would be on a call and you would hear me say, now, Joe, you're not recording this, are you? Because if you're recording this, this is Kimberly Hambrick and I'm not aware of it. And I have to give credit where credit is due to an amazing connection of mine who called me on that. He said, why do you keep doing that? And I didn't know I was doing it. And that was another transition for me. I had to change that thinking. I had to learn to trust people again. To have trust like that so broken. To have the trust of other people who didn't find what this person did as offensive or illegal as I thought it was. I realized for the first time that it's just me. And I have to stand up for myself. And I have to believe in myself. And so that's kind of where it came from.
There are things that need to be present, and you are the ultimate decision maker of what needs to be present, right? Yeah. And I think we get inculcated in our current situation in the world these days, and I think we try not to make any waves with anyone. You know what I mean? It was a good situation. There might have been a small microsecond of hesitation, but not long, because this was one that was so fundamental around trust that the decision was clear. The other thing I think about hearing this story and this particular inflection point on your transition, and you hinted at it, and that is it was hard for you to trust after that anyone else, not just this one individual who recorded you, right? Now that obvious thing to you that should be present in all relationships, being transparent, open, asking permission for things like that, respect. Now your assumptions were kind of blown out of the water. Yeah. And it made you extra cautious with others. So
yeah. Well, and you talk about the timing of how things happen in our life, because you alluded to it a little bit earlier when we talked on my podcast. We are both people of faith. And so I realized at that point, it didn't matter what other people thought about me. There's one person whose voice matters and opinion matters. And I leaned into that. And then the second voice that I listen to is my own voice. There are times when there's still people in my life who bubble up and, you know, tell me when I'm doing wrong. And, you know, I'm perfectly imperfect, so tell me when I'm doing wrong, that's okay. But I also sometimes very flippant tell them to take a number. And they look at me and I'm like, just take a number and get in line. And it's not that I don't, but I spent too much of my life worrying what other people thought of me. And then the other intersection with my story is that I had joined the John Maxwell team, which you and I are both members of, about 3 months prior to my exit from corporate. And I was certified as a coach about 4 years prior through International Coach Federation. I knew it was something that I was called to do to help others. I knew John, but I didn't know he had a team. And so I joined this team in October of 2017 and blown away, just first and foremost for my own leadership. And then fast forward to January, my 5-year plan in October now becomes a 1-week plan because it happened in January. And the interesting thing is that I was going to my very first IMC, International Maxwell Certification, to be certified 2 weeks later in February. So I show up at this event, and I know you've been at them, 3,500 people, the energy in the room. And I was a deer in the headlights. I didn't have a clue. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. But what I did prior to going to the IMC was to join mentorship and connect with the mentors. And shortly after, started getting on those calls. And so we talked about the importance of coaching. So we're coaches, but we also have coaches. And 2 of those voices truly helped me through this. And I consider those other transition points, if you will. The first one was Paul Martinelli, who went to John and helped him create the John Maxwell team. And in talking with Paul, because I'm pretty transparent, and what Paul said to me was I had to own the truth that was mine to own in this situation. And that was powerful because I can own that it was my decision to leave. I can own, in reflecting back, that maybe in the course of 10 years, I might have done some things that this person didn't agree with. But I can't own this person's actions of documenting everything and sort of lying in wait for that moment to spring it all on me. I can't own that.
No.
I can't own that others didn't see anything wrong with that. What I could own was, maybe they're not seeing anything wrong with it because they might think similar of me. I still couldn't change their views, but what I could do was change me.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. So I took ownership and I moved forward. And the other mentor is Mark Cole, who is now the CEO and president of the John Maxwell Enterprise. The very first time I talked to Mark, and this man leads an amazing company. He meets with world leaders, and he's talking to little old me. And Joe, that first call involved a word and a lot of crying, and another word and a lot of crying. And Mark was so patient in letting me just talk. And what he said to me was, borrow the belief I have in you at this moment until yours matches. And that went straight to my heart. And it's just, no one's ever said something like that to me. And so I grabbed hold of it, and I saw Mark in person probably 3 months after. And he came up to me and he gave me a hug, and he said, I see it. I said, you see what? He said, I see that your belief matches. And there was just something just so powerful in that, because I had to do that work. And for me to do the work internally, that for somebody to see it externally. Those are powerful moments. Yes, and those powerful moments only came because of that, at the point, a devastating transition point that I could have curled up and accepted what had happened, or I could move forward like I did. And I have never been so proud of myself that I moved forward.
That's awesome. And I think it's also very encouraging. We talk about transitions, and people tend to think of just about the one inflection going from one thing to the next. But really, I see them as sort of seasons where you might sense something's not quite right. You mentioned that you felt, well, you didn't mention it, actually. I just observed it. You went ahead and invested in yourself to join the John Maxwell team. You went ahead, years ahead of that and got your certification on coaching with another organization. When the time came and you left that corporate job, you had already had these threads going on, right? You went through that, I'm going to call it a devastating situation.
It was. I mean, when I referred to it.
You stood strong and you made the decision you need to make. And I think what's encouraging is that at that moment, the path forward was uncertain. You had confidence in yourself. It was uncertain and it was a little wobbly. And I think that when you're in the middle of a transition season where you're going through a tough change, it can feel wobbly. And I just think that story about Paul's coaching and Mark's coaching in particular, those stories are very powerful, because now if you look back to where you are now and think about how congruent what you're doing now is with your gifting and your heart, it's just kind of a beautiful thing. When you're in the middle of it, you can be very discouraged, not knowing what the path forward is.
Absolutely. I didn't have confidence in myself at that moment. I had belief in myself, which is something that I never truly had. Because I was the queen of limiting self-belief, even though I was very successful. There was always this internal dialogue, and I call it the BS swirl. And we'll just say BS stands for belief system. Yeah, okay. That's what it stands for. It could be something else, but it's belief system. And, I would push myself to get ahead, but I never celebrated because there had to be something more. So you had mentioned earlier, we are not our positions. Well, at that point in my career, I was my position, and I was only as good as the next position I would get. And so for me, I had to believe in myself first. And then as I continued to do that work and surrounded myself with the right mentors, the confidence grew. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it took me a good year before I would even want to talk about this, because, I refer to the good, the bad, the ugly, and that was an ugly mirror moment for me. It truly was. But I don't have any shame in it, because I'm not that person anymore. But this is what I am, but I'm not. And I know you understand this. I'm not that person, but I am, but I'm so much better. And that is truly the power of working with people and investing in yourself. And I believe it. So it is such an honor and a gift for me when people entrust me with helping them forward, because, I say this often, and I've never smoked a day in my life. I take that back. I took one puff in 6th grade because it was a dare, and I thought I was going to die.
There you go.
But you always hear about reformed smokers, that once they quit, they want everybody to quit. Well, once my eyes were truly open to my gifts and my potential, I just want everybody's eyes to be open to their gifts and their potential.
Yeah. It's just a fabulous thing to go through, but it's fabulous to be honored to be allowed into that sacred territory. The other thing I would say is that, you've talked about moments, right? These coaching moments that made it very clear as to what you were going through, and these nuggets of advice for you, okay, and moving forward, and how impactful they were for you. Beyond those moments, was there a key takeaway in this particular transition that you think of, or a lesson?
For me, it was to truly listen to that internal voice and this doesn't feel right. This just doesn't feel right. And if it doesn't feel right, to act on it. I'm a firm believer in gut instinct. I mean, and at that moment, it was really clear to me. I always have ongoing dialogue and conversations with the good Lord. And sometimes I chuckle and say, well, I was a really slow learner. I must have been missing a couple signs along the way.
Oh,
but
gosh, you remind me of that Bruce Almighty scene where he's in the car. Stop, go back, turn around.
Yeah, but the reality is, even though that I say that, and I love that movie, even though I say that, I don't have regrets, and I may have missed a few things, but I know I wasn't ready to see or hear them.
I think you get so attached, and you mentioned it before, and people talk about this, but I don't think they understand the power of attachment people get towards their career identity, their job. You meet with people and you say, hi, what do you do?
Exactly.
Basically, what's your job? That's who you are, And I think what you and I talked about before, we discovered that who we are is not that. I mean, we would be who we are. We would be adding value the way we do. And I can trace this back, and I know you can too, back in your career when you had a job, and even when you described yourself as a corporate development person, and I describe myself as a CIO, I was still really excited, engaged with coaching my staff and doing those things. I just didn't have the title. I didn't have the focus or the intention on it like I do today.
No,
and so it's just
agree.
Interesting how long that sort of pre-tail is, and we're just not focused on the signals that are sort of in front of us that cause this friction where we're not really completely aligned with our gift.
We're not aware of them, or we choose to ignore them because there's something about the comfort of staying, quote unquote, in a job. And I have these conversations often with people who they're unhappy. They know there's something more. And when we want to explore that a little bit with them, and they say, yeah, but. And then I just kind of say, then you've made a decision, and your decision is to stay. And they don't always appreciate that, but I always bring up an early example. I was young when I started working. I worked with people who were much older than me. They called me kid. I was young. And one of the gentlemen that was older than me that I had worked with wanted to apply for a position in the company. So he had submitted his resume, and he didn't even get an interview. And so he's in his office, and I could tell he was upset. So I went in to talk to him, and his face was as red as my sweater. And he was so angry. And what I said to him, not even knowing anything at this point, I was probably 25. I said, you need to take a breath here. And you have a couple choices. If you're this angry and upset, you need to go and ask them why you didn't even get an interview. I can't do that. And I said, well, then you need to let it go. Because if you don't let that go, and this was before cell phones, I said, I'm going to my office to call 911 because I'm terrified for your health here. And he decided not to ask them, and he decided to not let it go. But I watched this man just shrivel up and become bitter and angry and do the absolute minimum that he had to do. And I realized that's not what I ever want to do with my life. And it is such a unfortunate, great example because he made a choice, and his choice was to stay miserable. And no amount of coaching or brilliance or anything on anyone's part was going to change his mind. And so I just always think about that. It didn't make the connection at that point in my life, but as I move forward, that's always the image that pops up. And I tell people, if you want to stay where you are, that's great. Do the best, whatever it is there, and find something else, in your off hours to bring you joy. Because no one fully lives if they're their job, in my opinion.
Yeah. Rich story, great lessons. Do you have another transition story that you might want to share?
Yeah, wow. Actually, I did. Well, when you and I talked, I mean, our whole life is moments of
Yeah.
transition, and that one was just a biggie.
Yeah.
That was coupled with I call them gut kicks. So I had the personal gut kick with the situation with my son, brought on by that one. But about a year or two ago, 2019, so it was a year or two ago, the world that I used to work in corporate, a project that I used to oversee was coming up again for renewal. And a lot of people were reaching out to me to write proposals for them. And it was so funny because it's like I could get paid to write a proposal. This is great. I was successful. All the companies I worked with didn't win, but quite a few did. And one company had asked if they could include me in the bid as the director. And I said, well, yes, but I'm still doing my consulting work. And so we made an arrangement and they won. And the plan, Joe, was for me to exit early. And the woman that we wrote in as the deputy director unfortunately became ill and passed away. So I stayed in a little bit longer than I initially intended, and then COVID hit.
Mm.
And so when I think about the past year, when I think about my entering that project in the fall of 2019, this company, nobody there knew me because, they didn't know me. They might have known of my reputation, but they didn't know me. They had just lost someone that worked with them for many years, and they were hurting. And I was bringing a competitor to the table as a partner because I'm all about creating the best team. And when I think about how I kicked off that team, when I think about how I led that team through COVID, it was such an amazing eye opener for me as a leader because I didn't let any of that past baggage come to bear. And I focused on what I knew was most important, my servant heart,
Mm.
and making sure I was there for people. And I don't say this often, but I was very proud of myself because when COVID first hit, and I have a team that they're finding out they're going to work from home. That's a little
Yeah.
unnerving for some people. I actually prefer it. And then a lot of them had small children. And so I remember, and I always tell this colleague that he was the reason why I set up these weekly calls because I was having a conversation with him. And he said, I'm working from home and oh my gosh, my kids are going to be home. And he just had this look on his face. So I started scheduling weekly calls with the team. And the whole purpose of the call was, how are you doing?
Mm.
Really? We didn't talk about work. If they didn't want to share, they didn't have to. But what happened throughout the early part of COVID, I saw a team come together so much more quickly because what they realized and I realized we were all in the same store, but it was impacting us differently. So we were all in different boats. And I remember a supervisor in the company had got me on a call with the HR person, had heard what I was doing and heard about it not from a complaint perspective. The team loved it. And I was told that wasn't my job.
Sorry, I shouldn't
And I
laugh,
said,
but it's just
I
ridiculous.
said, oh, no, no. Yeah. And I was like, and I'm like, I'm confused. What's not my job? And the HR person said, you're not a counselor. I said, I'm not a counselor. And I never said I was. And I said, do you know what I'm doing? So I explained what I was doing. And she said, well, that's not your place. And I said, you do understand that I'm certified as a coach in two different organizations. And I'm not even coaching. I'm creating a space for people who are hurting
Yeah.
to be heard. And I said, and I was pretty direct, if you don't think this is what I am supposed to be doing, I'm not talking about it as an employee or a director, but as a human, then there's a bigger problem here than this. And I held my ground. So that taught me that, I didn't buy into a lot of what this other person from that one transition period might have thought about me or said and what others did. But I was so proud of myself because when I moved forward, and we talked about learning to trust again, but I moved forward and I still held on to that heart for other people.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest with you. You know, I talk about that time in my life that somebody tried to personally, professionally, financially, and emotionally destroy me. And yet, I still saw the good in people, and I wanted people to move forward. And that's something that I'm most proud of. And it's also a way that, because you and I are both people of faith, and we talked about it when you were on my podcast, you can't bring your faith into the corporate world. And it's starting to swing back to really being, you know, not good to be a person of faith in some people's minds. And that's unfortunate. But the values that are my faith are values of treating people with respect and viewing us all the same. And I was able to hold on to those, and I'm able to do that more intentionally without calling it what it is.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have got to that point.
Yeah, it's interesting.
If all the ugly hadn't happened.
That's really interesting. You know, those are used to move us in the right direction. But first of all, I'm kind of shocked at the response you had from the HR person. But with that said, let me just interject this. You and I talked before. I facilitate a group of CIOs in the life science space. There's over 30 of them, and obviously they had to make a big pivot to support their companies when everybody went remote. Most of them are manufacturing and pharma, biopharma companies. So there's some positions that have to be on site, but a large swath of the organization had to get off site, right, and be remote. Technology-wise, they were ready. I mean, maybe they had to buy some more PC laptops or some equipment or up some licenses here or there, but they were ready. Our last meeting a few weeks ago, we talked about what were their plans for coming back to work and how their executive teams were discussing the different work models, hybrid, remote, on-site, what jobs get it. You know, they're wrestling with all of that. And something that came out was the biggest concerns those teams were starting to have was, and those leaders, was this point that you touched on. It's the human side of things. It's the social disconnection. It's not just, you know, the water cooler stuff. It goes so far beyond that. And one thing I brought up in this Zoom meeting was that this is really going to expose leadership weaknesses in companies, right? Because you know, because you were in corporate for so many years, as well as I going through this as well, that people go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, and leaders and managers tend to focus on more of the tick list on their operational plans than the people, which is very short-sighted. And from a very practical standpoint, developing your staff has such huge leverage, and you really can't develop your staff without element coaching.
Yeah,
you really cannot develop your staff to stretch, to step into bigger roles without engaging them at a personal level. So I just can circle back and just say I'm really shocked by that feedback.
But I'm so glad that you did, because
old school.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you did, because, you know, when COVID first happened and everything, first of all, everybody thought it was going to be 2 weeks and everything done. But, you know, here we are just celebrated the year and still going strong, unfortunately. I would always say that, and I always use all lowercase letters, that it was fascinating to see the leadership decisions that were being made early on and throughout. And you started to realize, as you just said, it shines a spotlight on your leadership weaknesses. Well, being faced with a pandemic does not make you a great leader if you were not a great leader before. And so those were the leaders who made the decisions to string their employees on for a little bit, giving them no decision. I have one connection who would have weekly calls on Mondays. Everything was great. Everything was great. Not to worry about anything. Then all of a sudden, their work was, I think they were back to 70%. No warning. It's just like a decision. And that was great. Everything was great for a couple of weeks, no Monday call. And then on Tuesday, the person was let go. Well,
Oh,
I agree with difficult leadership decisions, but that's not how you
sure.
handle it because you're not putting the people first. You're not focusing on people-centric, value-based, heart-centered leadership. Then you had others who are a leader who, when I would ask them about their staff, and the comment was, I have no idea what they do. Well, I'm not expecting you to be able to rattle off their spouse's name, their children. At a minimum, you should know what you hired this person to do. And it was all hand-offish. They sat in their office. They went to a meeting. They rallied, their little tick list. And it was really interesting to watch some of leaders like this when they started to engage in a virtual environment. Oh, they were so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I will say that story that I shared with being told what it wasn't my job, I've had a number of people reach out to me and say that has resonated where they started to do emails to their team, just checking in with them, not talking about work. And I've had a couple people that I work with on the team now who have thanked me, and no one leads like you lead. And on the one hand, that makes me feel good. On the other hand, it really hurts my soul.
Yes.
Because you should be in a leadership role to engage and encourage and support others. If you're in a leadership role just because, quote unquote, you're the leader and it's a position,
Yeah. It's exposed.
Yes, and you're right. Going back is going to be a transition as well. And from an educational point, I will just say that I was part of a call a couple of weeks ago where some schools have been hybrid, some have been full-time, but there are still some holdouts in the country. Not everybody is back. And I was having a conversation with some educators, and I said, what are you doing? How are you preparing the teachers for like somebody like me that comes back? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I'm a high I. I love people. I haven't had interaction. When you put me in a room with people, I'm going to be bouncing off the wall. You can't crush that child's spirit who's so happy to be back.
That's a good point.
And it's the same at work. I think we're going to find that even when businesses, by and large, do open back up, a lot of people might not feel comfortable or want to come back. So what are you going to do about that?
That's a good point. And we discussed that at this leadership meeting, these CIOs, is, there's a paradigm shift that has occurred. So in a lot of the technology areas, software, things that don't require being on site, and other positions outside of technology, it's people are going to have options. Yeah. So they may be working for company A, and then if company A tries to just behave the same way they've done before with the same expectations, the employee might say, I think I'll go work for company B on Monday, and I'll stop on Friday at company A.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
It's possible. Yes. And they see that option. So it's even more important to engage your employees from a human standpoint than it ever has been. Because, they say that people don't leave companies, they leave their boss or,
yeah,
peers
very
or something.
True.
But the same is going to be true to keep them.
Exactly. We had a conversation with somebody just recently saying we have a number of positions that this organization wants to fill. And the woman said, we're not competing for people in our area because the people in our area who are qualified can now go to another state. and have better benefits, better pay, do more engaging work, and not leave their home because they're used to it. So we have that. And then I want to be kind of careful with where I'm going to stick a toe in here next, because over the past couple of years, very heated conversations in the United States on all types of talking points. And a lot of corporations are putting out statements that doesn't have anything behind it. And so I really struggle. I struggle with that from a couple of points of view. I struggle with just putting words out there, not having action behind it. And then I had a coaching client who was really struggling because this person's corporation put out a statement from the CEO, and the statement said, as the CEO, I believe, and my team also believes. And the person did not believe that way and wasn't sure what they could do about that. So I put caution out there because I think as a CEO, you have a right to put something out there, but I think it's when you put all your team members in that statement without checking. That one, I would have a problem with that. I want to be a part of the conversation knowing that I can do something about it. I don't ever want to be a part of a conversation when I just put out the words and then do nothing about it. And I definitely don't want people speaking for me in a way that might go against something that I care deeply about.
It's very similar to the point you made before about having the strength to make the decision to leave that other company. What kind of culture do you want in the organization you're going to be associated with? You have a decision to make, and indecision is a decision.
Exactly.
Right? So, it's a good point.
Yeah. That's a slippery slope, because if you come out, and the person was really having an internal dilemma, because to come out and say, I disagree, would look negatively on this person. But you ultimately have a choice, and that's where we left that conversation, that they needed to start to find somewhere else they wanted to work. If they felt so strongly against what the company was now standing for. And I got into a conversation with a couple other leaders about when the vaccine was coming, and they wanted to require all their employees to have it before they came back. When you sign up to work in an organization, you should see what you're signing up for. Now, this was completely different, and nobody knew about this, that it was going to happen, but you still have to give your employees that option.
Yeah. I'm not sure legally what can be done in that regard, too. So I think that I do know that some general counsels are advising their leadership team that they cannot make that kind of statement.
Yeah, and I was just on a connection on LinkedIn with somebody who's over in the UK, and the post was, this person believed that a vaccine should be mandatory and everybody should take them. What do you think? And I said, I disagree. I never want anything to be mandated to me from the federal government. And this has nothing to do with where I vote or how I vote, but that's scary.
But again, apart from the specific application here, you know where you stand, you've made a decision, you're being definite and intentional about your decision, right? It gets dicey when people know where they are, but they won't dig in and stand for themselves. I guess this is an emerging lesson I'm hearing from you.
And trust me, it's one that I learned very early on in my career, and it was a difficult one. We were all part of a team that was working on a national conference, and it was not without its bumps and bruises. Some things were not done well, and so we had a debrief. Other people had been talking to me, but I was still, kind of felt like I was the Norma Ray and I could champion all the causes, and and so I shared what was not going well. And I always refer to this a supervisor, and I'm still connected with her to this day. And the only way I could describe it was you were either at the foot of the cross or on the cross with her. There was no in between.
There's no gray there.
No gray. And it was ugly and it was difficult. But I stood with what I said. And I remember we were on the road and I went back to my room after the meeting, and like 4 or 5 people all came to my room. All 4 or 5 people who agreed with me but didn't say anything, and wanted to know where we were going to dinner. And I said, yeah, I don't know where you guys are going to dinner, but I'm not going with you. I felt so strongly that if you can't stand up for what you believe in, don't expect somebody to fight your battle. And that was another transition for me. I really learned at that point that I should focus on my voice and what was important to me, that I could not fight another person's battle for them.
Yeah. Well, Kimberly, we're coming up on an hour here, so I thought maybe this would be a good time to sort of pivot in our conversation. And I like to ask this question of people, and others do this too, is given all of that we've discussed, and probably a lot that we haven't discussed, what advice would you give to yourself if you were winding the clock back, your advice to your 25-year-old self?
Well, definitely my advice to me would be that you're worth it and you believe in yourself like nobody else, and stay true to yourself. I don't look back with regrets because I think it's wasted energy. I told myself that I learned the lessons that I needed to learn at the time that I was ready for them. But I do think if I just knew that I was worth it earlier on, would have made all kinds of difference in the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. Kimberly, how can people, well, first of all, let me back up a second. We talked about your coaching. Are there other things that you engage with people on besides coaching?
Yeah, coaching involves training, professional development, all of that, speaking. I do all of that. But you mentioned my podcast, and when I shared the episode of your podcast, wow, the feedback was great. I know you saw it, just an amazing point of view that you shared, and people loved the name of your podcast. So you and I talked about this. I created a podcast while I was mowing grass. I thought I'm gonna start a podcast. So it's the Cannoli Coach, which people are like, are you teaching me how to make cannolis?
Where'd that come from?
It came from I was in the coaching business. I want to differentiate myself, and I'm an Italian American. I like cannolis. But then I went maybe a step too far and butchered the line from The Godfather. So my tagline is leave the frustration, take the cannoli. And I know my dad, who an amazing Godfather fan, every time I utter that, I know he's just looking down, shaking his head at me. But the concept of it is to get our stories out and to share. You talk about the transition points. I talk about a life-defining moment, which are sort of the same. When we share our stories, first and foremost, we heal. And then somebody who needed to hear that also heals. And I absolutely love that. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, Joe. If somebody would pay me to do the podcast, I would do it for all the time, because I love talking with people. And so that's kind of the things that I do. It allows me to be true to myself, to get my slightly goofy personality out there, but also to shine the spotlight on other people, which I just truly believe that people need to be comfortable in owning their gifts and sharing their gifts with the world.
Yeah. This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for coming on Titans of Transition, Kimberly.
Oh, I've enjoyed it. Joe, you're just one of those. When we met and then we started talking, this is great. I love that you flipped the tables, and I hope that we continue to find ways to support each other.
Looking forward to it.
And continuing the dialogue.
Hey, folks, I will put links in the show notes to Kimberly's website, to her podcast, and other contact information she wants to share with me, pass along. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us at Titans of Transition with Kimberly Hambrick. Hey, thanks for joining me today on Titans of Transition. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please check the show notes for additional information. Also, please like and subscribe to this channel.